Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon. In darkness let me dwell. The ground shall sorrow be, the roof despair to bar all cheerful light from me. The walls of marble black that moisten still shall weep. My music, hellish jarring sounds to banish friendly sleep. Thus, wedded to my woes, embedded in my tomb, oh, let me live and die till death does come, till death does come. This is Forlorn Hope Fancy, a fancy by John Dowland, track from the album Black Bile by guitarist Zoran Dukic, that is released by Guitar Co-op. John Dowland, British lutenist and composer from the time of Queen Elizabeth I, late 16th century. Why start a podcast about the guitar with a composer who was a lutenist and wrote music much before the modern guitar was even invented? Well, that is because the rediscovery of John Dowland in the 20th century brought back a composer whose anxieties resonate with our own in the 21st century. Dowland wrote for the lute, an instrument in the plucked string family. Many people are mistaken about the lute and think it's a kind of grandfather of the guitar, but in fact they were instruments of different origins which developed in parallel. There is the guitar family, instruments shaped like a nate, and the lute family, instruments with an egg-like shape. When the first recordings of Dowland's music began to circulate in the late 1950s, listeners were faced with an exact contemporary of Shakespeare's who cultivated pleasant melancholy with a narrow luxury. In songs and lute pieces with titles like Forlorn Hope, Flow My Tears, or In Darkness Let Me Dwell. It is, in the opinion of critic Alex Ross, music of a friendly melancholy with moral value which reflects the guilt of being happy amidst the injustices of the world. Melancholic was all the rage in Elizabethan England. Mood theorists associated melancholic humor with black bile. That's where Zoran Dukic derived the title of his album, Black Bile. It is associated with the element earth, with aging, and with death. Neoplatonic philosophers viewed melancholy no longer as a vice, but as a mark of genius. His music brings comfort through reflection, knowing that someone 400 years ago also felt loneliness, also felt disappointment or the collapse of ideals, and knew how to express them in a way that still resonates with us in the 21st century. But is Dowland music all depression? In this episode, we will discuss what is known about John Dowland's life, find out if he escapes melancholy in his works, and explain why he's important for guitarists and students of guitar today. The research of the life of a composer who lived 450 years ago and was forgotten for 3 centuries is both a challenge and a great pleasure. We want to know who was the person behind music of such overwhelming melancholy and sophistication, but this person eludes us. Usually, when there is some reference, it's some official document, a payment contract, a preface to a publication. Unfortunately, Dowland was not shy of talking about himself. As important as these composers may seem to us, within the courtly engine, they were just a very small part, and relatively little importance was given to their legacy. This is how we try to guess, or to get a clue, to reconstruct facts from the life of a composer like Dowland and know what kind of person he may have been. Often the music itself provides clues, as we'll see during the episode. I'll let you know the trivial reason for Dowland being our first composer. In this series, I'll try to talk about each composer in the birthday month, but we couldn't find any of the most important composers recorded by GuitarCoop who had a birthday in January. Since we don't know Dowland's exact date of birth, he was chosen to represent the month of January. Most sources point 1563 as Dowland's birth year. It seems that he was born in London. There are still those who speculate that he could have been born in Dublin, but this hypothesis has lost credibility in recent years. He himself says that he studied music since he was a child. That suggests that he may have had a courtly education, but we don't know anything about his family. He was probably quite bright because when he was only 17, he was hired to go to Paris in the service of the British ambassador to France. He then traveled extensively in Germany and Italy, where he may or may not have met prominent musicians such as Pretorius, Caccini, Gabrieli, and even Gesualdo in Ferrara. At this time, there is an event that defines practically the entire professional life of Dowland. He converts to Catholicism. In Protestant England, depending on the moment, a Catholic who refused to attend Anglican religious services would have to pay fines, monetary fines. Anyone who tried to convert British people to Catholicism would be accused of treason and could eventually be executed. During the reign of Elizabeth, in 1570, Pope Pius V declared her a heretic and threatened with excommunication any Catholic who showed submission to the Queen. As a result, Elizabeth had dozens of Catholics executed. They are now considered martyrs of the Catholic Church, and some have even been canonized. That is, the atmosphere of paranoia that pervaded religion's life in England was very, very real and a matter of life and death. That makes Dowland's conversion to Catholicism an extremely serious matter. When Dowland was 25, he obtained a Bachelor of Music degree from Christ Church College in Oxford. 6 years later, a vacancy opened for the court lutenist. Dowland applied for the position, but his application was rejected, according to him, because he was a Catholic. Although other Catholic musicians like William Byrd, for instance, were hired, and that may suggest another reason for Dowland not being hired. He left England, and at the age of 35 in 1598, he was hired by the court of Christian IV of Denmark. King Christian loved Dowland's music and paid him astronomical sums. In fact, Dowland was one of the highest paid officials in the entire Danish court. And he ended up in the Kingdom of Denmark, where Shakespeare set one of his most emblematic plays, Hamlet. However, Dowland was an extremely undisciplined employee and often exceeded his period of leave granted by the king, while he was in England to take care of the publication of his music. Perhaps because of this, he was dismissed in 1606 and returned to England. We know Dowland was married and had children. One of them, Robert, also became a lutenist and took the place of his father at court after his death. However, Dowland left them behind during the periods when he worked abroad, what suggests perhaps a troubled family life. Dowland had a difficult character and had a tendency to complain about everything and often. It turns out that we are not talking about a simple court musician. Dowland was exceptional. He was a polyglot, and he spoke fluent Latin and French and enough Italian, German, and Danish. He had a university degree in Oxford. Probably worked, and that is very interesting, as a spy for Sir Robert Cecil, Earl of Salisbury. If you have ever seen the famous rainbow portrait of Queen Elizabeth, you will have noticed that her cloak is decorated with eyes and ears. It seems that they represent the activities of Sir Robert Cecil, who was the Secretary of State and trained the secret agents for Elizabeth. She was a true eagle and knew everything that was going on behind her, among her subjects and abroad, because, of course, her government was a continuous fight against conspiracies and coup attempts. It turns out that being a confessed Catholic, there was a conflict. Whatever his religion, Dowland was loyal to the Queen, despite being offended by her remark that Dowland is a man who could serve any prince in the world, but he is an obstinate papist.
Disdain me still, that I may ever love, for his love and joys can love no more. The war once past with ease, men cowards prove, and ships return to rot upon the shore.
As a renowned artist, he had good circulation in the European courts and traveled to Italy with the excuse of meeting the madrigalist Luca Marenzio in person. But he didn't meet him. He met Englishmen in Italy, and those people were Catholics. According to Dowland himself, he found himself involved in a conspiracy to kill the Queen and to put Mary, Queen of Scots, in her place. Although Dowland was offered a very high salary and a safe conduct for his family to come from England to live with him in Italy, he ended up walking away and wrote a letter to Robert Cecil and to the Queen explaining the whole situation and asking for forgiveness.
If my complaints could passions move, or make love see wherein I suffer wrong.
With this, he managed to return to England, and finally in 1612, when Elizabeth was already dead and James I was now the king, he was finally hired as a lutenist at the court. We know that he received his last salary in January 1626 and died next month at the age of approximately 63 years. The poet Richard Barnfield wrote about him, "Dowland is dear to thee, whose heavenly touch over the lute ravishes the human sense." Dowland's work consists of about 100 pieces for solo lute, about 100 songs, and a similar number of works for viol concert. Some of these works were published. Some are found in manuscripts or in collections published throughout Europe. Much of the music was copied, and much music that was not by Dowland was published under his name. That suggests that he was already a very prestigious composer during his lifetime. Since a good part of his music is dedicated to figures of nobility, it's possible to trace a chronology through these dedications. These people, of course, they died, they gained new titles or changed names when they were married. That allows us to trace a chronology of pieces that appear in various versions in different sources along time. First of all, Dowland is the first great English composer of songs. His songs are not only about melancholy, but cover a wide range of human concerns and feelings, including comic and religious songs. They were published in 3 books between 1597 and 1603. and in them, Dowland already appears as a full, mature composer. We should know at least some of the most famous ones, such as Come Again.
Come again, sweet love doth now invite. Thy grace is that refrain to do me due delight, to see, to hear, to touch, to kiss, to die with thee again in sweetest sympathy.
Come Heavy Sleep. That is a beautiful metaphor for death. It's a piece that was utilized by Benjamin Britten in his major work, already in the 20th century, Nocturnal.
Come, heavy sleep, the image of true death.
Dowland's best-known song is Flow My Tears, which is also known as a lute solo called Lachrimae Pavan.
My trees fall from your springs, exile forever let me mourn when night's black.
Can She Excuse? It's a song whose poem may have been written by Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, a suitor and a favorite of Queen Elizabeth. Essex had several disagreements with the Queen for political and other reasons, and these lyrics may be a plea for reconciliation.
Can she excuse my wrongs with virtue's cloak? Shall I call her good when she proves unkind? Are those clear fires which vanish into smoke? Must I praise the leaves where no fruit I find?
Too bad these poems didn't have much of an impact because Essex was finally beheaded in the Tower of London in 1601, accused of treason. Yes, the voice singing last song is familiar. It's the singer Sting, former lead singer of the band The Police. He's liked Dowland's music since he was a boy and recorded this very beautiful album with the lutenist Edin Karamazov. I think this is the perfect illustration that Dowland is not only the first great English songwriter. He starts this trend of melancholy in all English pop music, which we can hear in Sting's music himself, in Adele, in Morrissey, Amy Winehouse, Mumford and Sons, and in London Grammar.
Let winter break. Let it burn till I see you again. I will be here with you, just like I told you I would.
Many of Dowland's songs appear in different versions. They can be sung with lute accompaniment or in the form of madrigals, or in a combination of voices and instruments. They also appear in solo lute versions. Apparently, the 16th century practice was much more flexible than the purism of the 20th century classical music. In 1604, Dowland published a book of concert music composed for 5 viols accompanied by a lute. This book is now the much admired Lachrimae, or 7 Tears. It consists of 21 pieces for a concert, out of which the first 7 in particular define Dowland as the master of melancholy. They all begin with a descending phrase which represents the slow flow of a tear, and use a collection of rhetorical elements to dissect pain and sadness. The first 7 are called Lachrimae and represent different motivations for the tears. Ancient tears, sighing tears, forced or true tears. The 8th is called Semper Dowland, Semper Dolens. The play on words reveals the way Dowland's name was probably pronounced 400 years ago. The title, Dowland is Always Sad, is the self-portrait that he left for posterity. All these works are pavans. The composer Thomas Morley said that the 3 main dances in court at the time were the pavan, the galliard, and the almain. Morley describes the pavan as a sober dance, suitable for serious dancing. It is really drawn out and suitable for people of little physical stamina, always following this pattern of pulse. The pavan character ranges from the extremely melancholic dances we've heard before, such as Lachrimae, to works of an almost mystical joy, such as Sir John Langton's pavan. Its complement, the galliard, is described as a lighter and more exciting dance and made to complement the pavan. It was certainly Dowland's favorite form. About 30 galliards survive, almost twice as many as the pavans and almains. It was a dance with a bouncy choreography and required much more physical stamina. Queen Elizabeth herself loved to dance it. Dowland's galliards display a wide variety of styles, shapes, and character. The one dedicated to Queen Elizabeth is especially assertive and majestic. Some others are somewhat warlike and evoke battle scenes, such as the one dedicated to Christian, the King of Denmark. The earlier ones tend to be simpler and faster. This very famous one called the Frog Galliard refers to Queen Elizabeth's last suitor, the Duke of Alençon, who was a very ugly man with a face marked by smallpox. Elizabeth called him her frog. This is the Frog Galliard. As time went on, Dowland reverted to his usual melancholy physiognomy in pieces such as Melancholy Galliard. Smaller in number, the almains are described as heavier dances and aptly represent the nature of people whose name they bear, that is, the Germans. Some of these almains are indeed march-like, but some are extremely humorous and full of nuances. Generally speaking, English lute composers had very little interest in the form most beloved by the Italians, the Fantasia. This form, often called fancy in English, was a form in free counterpoint with each line of the lute trying to imitate a chorale line. In the name itself, it denotes that in them the composer could give free rein to his creative imagination without the restrictions imposed by dance forms. Dowland left 7 masterpieces in this genre. The best known is an extremely youthful and virtuosic work. Another approach is that of a more Italianate style, which seems like a Polaroid photo of Dowland's own improvisation. Finally, there is a pair of chromatic fantasias in a tortured style, reminiscent of Luca Marenzio or Gesualdo, the Italian madrigal composers who Dowland so admire. The first one we heard at the beginning of the episode. This other one is called Farewell, and it does indeed sound like someone slowly turning their back and very slowly disappearing into the mist. Finally, Dowland left 8 ballad arrangements, popular songs of his time, which he arranged for the lute and often composed variations to. The most impressive is Loath to Depart, a song also associated with the Earl of Essex in one of his military trips. Dowland's variations are virtuosic and very ingenious. The rediscovery of Dowland's music is largely due to the life's work of the British lutenist Diana Poton. She devoted 30 years of her life to research in palatial archives. She published not only the first biography of Dowland, but also his complete works for the lute. Musicology, of course, has been constantly advancing and making new discoveries since then. But today, each piece by Dowland is numbered with the code P for potent. There are other turning points in this rediscovery. The composer Peter Warlock published some of Dowland's music as early as the 1920s. It was he who introduced this music to André Segovia, the most important guitarist then, who played 2 pieces in a concert in London in 1927. But it was not until 1956 that the group Pro Musica Antiqua released an album with the first book of songs and airs. And in 1958, a flood of Dowland recordings began to appear. Among them, there is one highlight. Julian Bream record an album of vocal music with the Golden Age singers. And 2 years later, his first solo LP with Dowland and Bach played on the lute. Many people do not know, but Julian Bream, who is the most influential guitarist in the second half of the 20th century, began his recording career playing the lute. Over the following decades, he released several albums of music by Dowland and his contemporaries. According to modern musicology, his interpretations still do not employ historical procedures other than the use of the lute itself, an instrument that was until then forgotten. But the conviction and the obvious affinity of sensitivity between Julian Bream and Dowland's music pours from every minute of their recordings. They have become a cultural icon and have definitively put Dowland's name back into the music map. After Julian Bream, there are literally hundreds of recordings of Dowland's music, starting with his vocal and concert music, and also of his lute music played on the guitar by people like Beto d'Avezac or on the lute. There are 4 projects that I know of the complete recordings of his lute works. The first one was a collective project, and more recently, in the 90s, there was a full recording by the American lute player, wonderful lute player Paul Odette, and after him, Jacob Lindberg and the British lute player Nigel North. All these recordings are wonderful, and they are represented in the playlist that accompanies this podcast that you are listening to. I really think Dowland's music should be a pillar of every guitarist's repertoire. But why do I think that of music that is not even written for the guitar? First of all, Dowland's lute, well, he started playing a 6-course lute and progressed to many course lutes throughout his career. Most of his music can be played with the guitar with very little adaptation. That is not the only reason. Not to mention the aforementioned relevance of his aesthetic universe to the 21st century, first and foremost because it is music of unquestionable quality. Unlike most of the composers who came before him in the Renaissance, his music has an extremely expressive melodic content with a personal style that is immediately recognizable both in his melancholy and his more effusive pieces. At the same time, it is highly polyphonic music, except that this polyphony is perfectly adapted to the technical resources of the lute. The result is music that is never more difficult than it should be. I often tell my students that before playing Bach's music, they should learn a handful of Dowland's works. That will teach them how to control polyphony before tackling works that are extremely complex like those of Bach's. And I'll say more, if you want to learn how to play scales properly, it is no use just studying dry and anti-musical exercises. Dowland's music is full of scales, both in bursts of speed and in passages that require resistance, but always in a very expressive context, which requires control of articulation and phrasing. If you are beginning on the guitar, Dowland has short pieces that are super easy to play and equally beautiful. This one is dedicated to a famous comedian of his time and is called Tartan's Resurrection. Or this ballad called What If a Day? Dowland has several easy pieces like those ones. If you've enjoyed Dowland's music so far, why don't you dive into the dark depths of the album Black Bile, a GuitarCoop release with guitarist Zoran Dukic. You can also listen to all the music mentioned in this podcast in the playlist I put together for you. Thank you for your audience. All the best and see you next episode. GuitarCoop Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon.